siger lige et ord til indledning, så kører vi. Er klar? Okay, we're starting in 1 minute. Great, grab a seat. And so, welcome back. This is the last session. We're running from now until 5:15. And then those of you who signed up for the dinner, I think there might still be tickets, can look forward to an amazing dinner over across the street at something called Rødder. Yeah, and we have somebody here. There you go. So you know me, I'm Christian Bason. I'm joined with presenters and panel of Professor Jakob Torfing from Roskilde University, and Sara Striegler, who is a co-founder, or she's founder of Kindred Lab and a former amazing colleague of mine with a very long CV in the design and public and innovation space. This session, I think the title we have on Jakob's presentation here is a pretty good one in terms of framing the session. How do we govern in turbulent times? How do we build more robust organizations? I think Sara will say, how do we build more experimental organizations, maybe even more future-oriented organizations? And so we're going to run it this way. First, Jakob, about 20 minutes. When he gets to 23 minutes, I'm going to start nagging him quite a bit for ending his talk. We've known each other for quite a long time, and I know Jakob has a lot to share because he's a really busy guy doing a lot of work. He's caught between Italy and was it Indonesia next time? Yeah, so very globally working. And then Sara will present her story on experimental organizations and the future-orientedness that we need. Before then, we do a mini panel, couple of questions to Sara and Jakob before we open it up to the floor. And so sharpen your pens, your tablets, whatever you're using, to have some questions ready for Jakob and Sara. So with no further ado, Jakob, take it away.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah. So I heard a lot good about your organization and your meetings and how engaged you all are. So I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Jakob. I'm a professor in politics and public administration at Roskilde University here in Denmark, just like half an hour outside Copenhagen. And I've been leading this Horizon Europe project for the last 4 years. Actually, we had our final review with the EU Commission yesterday. It can be really nasty, but it went all right. So we are happy. So you can see it was funded by the EU, and now we are anchored in a new research center called Secure at Roskilde University. So I'll be talking about robust governance in turbulent times. And I could find no better way to illustrate turbulence than these moving clouds, right? Because I think that is kind of, what we see today, a lot of black, nasty clouds moving in over the world, right? So we are in peril. We are facing all these problems, and that's what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about crisis and turbulence and how to deal with it in a robust way based on this research project. So let me start. So countries all over the world and public and private organizations alike, they suffer from all these many different problems. So it could be gang-related crime, traffic congestion. We all know that. Acts of terrorism that are often pretty random. Political polarization that is rising everywhere in the world is just horrible. Hybrid warfare. We are having Russian fighter planes coming into our airspace on a monthly basis here in Denmark. And they're like, cyber attacks like every day. And then there are all the risks, of course, associated with global warming, heat waves, as we see currently in Europe, cloudburst rain, flooding, drought, etc., etc. So my starting point here is that, we have learned to talk about these complex problems as being wicked problems in the sense that they are both cognitively and politically challenging. But I want to add to that diagnosis and argue that many of these problems, they are also rapidly changing in front of us. So there's also a temporal dynamic that we haven't really talked so much about. So many of these problems are really moving targets being really difficult to hit with public governance. So what we have done in our research project, our Horizon Europe project called Robust, very succinctly formulated, this project offers a new vocabulary. And I guess, sometimes it's really good to start simply with a new way of thinking or talking about things, right? So we offer a new vocabulary for addressing these complex and mutating problems and risks. And what we try to do is to replace the old traditional conceptual doublet of crisis and crisis management with a new set of concepts. So instead of crisis and crisis management, we talk about societal turbulence and robust governance. And we do believe that our research and our new concepts, they are more encompassing. They capture more than the old concepts of crisis and crisis management. Why? Because when we talk about crisis is traditionally defined as a critical moment in time where things could either go for better or for worse. But often in the period building up to a crisis, we see a lot of turbulence. And also there's often a long tail of turbulence after a crisis. So if we only focus on moments of crisis, we lose all that turbulence before and after the crisis. Also, we can perfectly well have turbulence without a crisis. So if we only focus again on crisis, we will miss out on that. So we are talking about societal turbulence, and we advocate robust governance, and I'll explain in a minute what that's all about. So we are claiming basically that we are living in turbulent times, and you may think that guy, he's crazy, because haven't we always been facing up to turbulence? And I think we have. Human life is a story of turbulence, right? We have encountered spells of famine, disease, war, civil unrest that has created these waves of refugees and migrants and so on who have wandered around and populated the earth. And here in Europe, we had a period after the Second World War. We talk about it as the post-war settlement. And that kind of created the illusion of stability, that we have somehow found a way here in Europe by combining organized capitalism, liberal democracy, and public welfare system. We actually thought that we have found a way to create societal stability, peace and love for everybody. But I think we now clearly see that was just an illusion. It was just, a moment that has already slipped away. Because today we are facing globalization, technological innovation, social disalignment where our value systems are breaking up, and also the disruption of the global world order. And all this is creating a new situation where turbulence is rapidly becoming the new normal. We even see with President Trump in the US, he has kind of weaponized turbulence. You know what I mean? He is deliberately creating chaos in the world, creating turbulence, using it as a weapon because he thinks that the more turbulence, the better chances he will have to strike a good deal. After all, he's a businessman. So, defining turbulence, what is it all about? Well, interestingly, it's an everyday concept. We have been using the notion of turbulence for centuries, and often we have used turbulence to describe these irregular movements in animals, animals on the savannah that are fleeing from a predator, or kids playing tag in the schoolyard, or even troops in a battlefield. So what was interesting for me when I started to dig into turbulence was to see that this concept of turbulence gained a huge popularity in a particular subfield of science called fluid mechanics. And in fluid mechanics, they use turbulence to describe a particular set of dynamic movements, like the clouds I showed before. So they use turbulence to characterize river currents, stormy weather, cloud movements, fire whirls, etc. And they became so obsessed with turbulence in fluid mechanics that they actually founded a journal of turbulence in 1920, and it's still there. It took some years before we started to talk about turbulence in the social sciences, but there is now a growing body of literature focusing on social, political, and economic turbulence. And that began to appear in the 1960s. And I've been through all that literature. And out of that, I developed this understanding of turbulence, or this definition of turbulence as a relatively enduring predicament where contingent events, developments, and demands interact to create a unpredictable temporal dynamic. So that's really the core of it. Turbulence is unpredictable dynamic, something that we were not expected, that suddenly hits us, and a dynamic that is, pretty chaotic. And there's a good image here on the board here. You can see this is like river currents, and we have a nice and laminar stream, very nice and quiet streams of water coming down a riverbed. Then it hits a barrier, and on the back side, we develop this turbulent pattern. So this is what it's all about. And they talk about turbulence in fluid mechanics, and now we do it in the social sciences. So you may also now wonder, what's the difference then between crisis, a very familiar concept that we have used a lot, and then turbulence? And the trick is, and the difficulty is that the two concepts actually do a lot of the same conceptual work. So both crisis and turbulence emphasize irregularity, something unexpected. They emphasize turmoil and disruption that call for swift and dedicated governance responses. But looking more closely, the two concepts are also different in pretty important ways. First of all, crisis. The notion of crisis, exactly as I said before, refers to these particular moments in time, like situations, a critical turning point where things may either go for the better or for worse. Crises are also in the literature often described as being triggered by singular events and being very threatening to the social questions that experience a crisis. And different from that, we see that turbulence often has an endurance or an extension in time. There can be turbulence for a long period of time. Turbulence is often driven or triggered by multiple interacting events and demands and so on. And turbulence is actually something we can live with to a certain extent. At least we have like a crisis management organization. They deal with turbulence all the time, right? And they are not, breaking down because of that. So crisis and turbulence, I argue, are actually different concepts. They do different things, but they are also related because, as I argue here, crisis may spur turbulence. Because when you have a crisis in one system, it often creates spillover effects to other systems, and then we start to have a turbulent development that is caused both by the crisis and the attempt to manage the crisis. I think the latter is very clear with the pandemic, because one thing was the pandemic itself, accelerating and exponential growth of virus and incidents. But when we started to lock down our societies, that created almost even more turbulence. And we lived with that for a long time, even after the healthcare crisis was kind of surpassed. So at the same time, we can also see that turbulence can trigger a crisis. And then that happens when we have an accumulation of turbulence in society, accumulating into kind of a perfect storm. We saw that very clearly. A good example is from the UK in 1979. We talk about it as the winter of discontent. And there were a number of pretty unrelated events that were all disruptive. There were wildcat strikes, there were lockouts, there were very cold winter, the renovation workers, they didn't pick up the garbage and so on. There was a lot of criticism of the government in the media, all kinds of things. There were cultural clashes between different groups in society. All these amounted to what was called the winter of discontent, and you all know what happened. The Labour government was forced to resign, and we got how much? 12 or 18 years of Margaret Thatcher. So, yeah. So crisis and turbulence are different concepts, but they are related and they can cause each other. That's the point. So we argue that turbulence calls for what we call robust governance. And robustness is also an everyday concept. We talk about robustness as being associated with strength, vigor, and sturdiness, the ability to cope with, adverse conditions like a tree trying to withstand heavy winds or storm. Scientific references to robustness emerged in the 1990s. So there was a really growth in the literature discussing robustness. And also in the social sciences, where we can see robust governance now being defined as the ability to uphold key public functions, purposes, and values in the face of turbulence through a combination of flexible adaptation and proactive innovation. So the situation is that we have a society where we have some really important public functions. We have to provide teaching and healthcare and so on. We have important purposes, important public values. All of this is something we want to maintain. But then we face turbulence that makes it really hard to uphold these public functions, purposes, and values. If not, we do what we call robust governance, which basically consists of flexible adaptation and proactive innovation. So you can hear robust governance is really about combining stability and change. So it's a kind of, we could call it dynamic conservatism. We realize in a turbulent situation that the only way to uphold key functions, purposes, and values is by transforming. It's through transformation, through adaptation and innovation, that is the way to uphold key public functions, purposes, and values. So we think that the notion of robust governance is actually pretty new and useful because we think and argue that robust governance provides an alternative to the, we call it the skilla of agility. So we all know about agility and, small startups and, how they must be agile and so on. And that's all fine, but we don't think agility in a radical sense is a strategy for government, because agility is really changing everything for the sake of changing. Everything can be changed in a startup as long as they make a profit. And that will not do in the public sector, because we actually have some core functions, core purposes, core values that we have to maintain. At the same time, robust governance is also an alternative to the characteristics of resilience, because resilience is kind of the opposite in our understanding of agility. It's a little too conservative because it's focused on the preservation or restoration of the status quo ante. So in the system theoretical understanding of resilience, the resilience is about how to protect and restore the original equilibrium of a system when it has been challenged. And that is done by kind of bouncing back. So this is why we call it conservative. Resilience is ultimately, in our understanding or our reading, about going back to what was there before the disturbance or the turbulence arrived. So you may think, oh, again, the guy's crazy, because we have seen in new research, there's a distinction between static and dynamic resilience. So static resilience is kind of the classical understanding, but then there are these people who argue that, well, resilience also involves some adaptation or even some innovation. But this is where we argue that is concept stretching. It's stretching resilience beyond its original meaning. So we try to kind of draw a line in the sand and argue that what is talked about more recently as dynamic resilience, we should talk about that as robustness. So unlike governance for resilience, we argue that robust governance does not aim to bounce back to what was there before, because maybe what was there before is neither attractive nor feasible. So instead, we try to bounce forward and exploit crisis situations and turbulence to get to a new and better place. So in the project, we went through all the crisis management literature and organizational transformation literature and actually discovered quite a repertoire of what we call robustness strategies. These are strategies for achieving flexible adaptation and proactive innovation, and these are strategies that can be helpful when facing turbulence. So we talk, for example, about planning for surprises. Provide vigilant responses to early or warnings, weak signals, really take weak signals seriously and see if there's something in it. Do we really want to respond to that? And do planning that is more taking the form of scenario planning, because we don't really know what will happen, so we should be prepared for different scenarios. We also talk about the need for organizations to build redundancy, slack, and buffers, because we need to have something in our back pocket to be ready to invest in a turbulent situation, investing in adaptation and innovation. And here's what we have. We have had a long period where new public management has ruled the world. And new public management was about creating lean organization where there's no slack, no redundancy, no buffers. And that is exactly what makes us vulnerable. We talk about exerting multivocality, not being too precise in our crisis responses or crisis response strategies, but really creating ambiguous and shifting storylines to prevent a lock-in of our strategies. Because that was what we saw in China. They had this policy: if there were only 2 incidents of corona in a big city, they would lock down, for 2 months. And that prevented herd immunity to develop. And when they finally were forced by protest and so on to open up, there were no herd immunity and millions of people died. So that was the bad effect of a lock-in that can be avoided by multivocality. We talk about accountable autonomy, allowing local agencies to really run with it and adapt central guidelines to local conditions, but still being accountable for their efforts. We talk about the need for scaling and modularizing crisis management strategies to mobilize and demobilize resources. And we talk about bricolage also as a strategy, recombining, reusing, or repurposing existing tool for a new purpose to adapt and innovate in the face of turbulence. And finally, we talk about the need to conduct experiments to facilitate probing and learning, to be, again, robust in answering turbulence. So in our project, we also started to explore what are then the conditions for being better able to deliver robust governance in the future. And we came up with 3 kind of governance factors that we think are immensely important for supporting and scaffolding robust governance. And that is multi-level governance, which allow higher level authorities to really give a license to innovate to lower levels and make it okay to deviate from standard solutions, but also allow lower level authorities to send up information about shifting conditions on the ground. We talk about hybrid governance, combining hierarchy, markets, and networks in a flexible way as also a tool for supporting robust governance. And we talk about what we have termed negotiated societal intelligence. That might be an interesting term for you guys, because it's about bringing together in what we call knowledge interfaces, actors with different knowledge claims based on different epistemologies, like bringing together elected politicians with a political astuteness, bringing them together with experts and even people with life world knowledge, and having them to negotiate their knowledge claim to develop actionable knowledge. Yeah, so this is our emerging framework, as you can see here. So we argue that societal outcomes are jeopardized by turbulence, and the rescue is robust governance delivered by different strategies and kind of anchored in these different governance factors. So I'm close to the end here because I wanted to end with talking about collaboration as our superpower when facing turbulence and trying to deliver robust governance. So I think the situation that we are in right now is that, just after the pandemic, people are thinking about what will be the next crisis. But actually, public governance do not know what will hit them next time. And I think a cardinal sin is to believe that the next crisis will be exactly like the old crisis. This is what we often, mistake. So when facing unpredictable dynamics, that is turbulence, there's a limit to what I will call dedicated preparedness strategies. Because we don't know what will hit us, it doesn't make sense to have warehouse after warehouse full of different types of protection gear and so on. So what is my recommendation? Well, my recommendation is that we all think about the next crisis as a zombies attack. Why a zombies attack? Because we don't know what it is. A zombies attack is, the unknown of unknowns, right? So think about the next crisis as a zombie attack, and that's because it contains a lot of unknown unknowns, and this really causes, if we don't know what will hit us, that kind of can make us use more generic form of preparation, basically to prepare ourselves to adapt and innovate, that is to be robust. So in this situation, when preparing for a zombies attack, developing a mindset ready for adaptation and innovation, I think the best we can do is also to rely on cross-boundary collaboration. I think that is really a superpower, cross-boundary collaboration that we can use to spur adaptiveness and innovativeness. So I think we need, in peacetime, kind of, to develop all these ecosystems of different actors that we can then pull together and draw upon to deliver robust governance when turbulent is on the rise. So I think this is the final thing. I think our research really chimes in with the EU strategy for crisis management, the new strategy from last year, where they talk about the task is to develop a total defense or total preparedness against all hazards, and they talk about how that require both an all of government and all of society approach. So that is really banking on the superpower of cross-boundary collaboration to be robust in turbulent times. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And while we transfer to Sara's slideshow, I wanted to just share one thought experiment with you. I often speak with groups where I ask, I think 12 years back, and think about what happened if you're standing in 2014 and looking to the future. Now, we just passed the 23rd of June, where Brexit happened 12 years ago. So if you're standing 12 years ago, you just had Brexit. But you still didn't have Europe's massive refugee crisis in 2015. You still did not have Trump #1 happening. You still did not have the pandemic happening. You still did not have Trump #2 happening. And you did not have the rise of ChatGPT and large language models happening. So just to say that when we look to the next 12 years, if you think about events of that kind of scales, what could be next? And maybe that is Jakob's zombie army of unknown unknowns. At least for my sake, I would say, we really don't know. And so now I know there's something called total football, these World Championship times, but total defense or total preparedness, or at least thinking of the totality of a society's capabilities, is quite a compelling argument. So thanks for that, Jakob, and I will continue the conversation in a moment. Now it's time for my former wonderful colleague. And, is the right slideshow you got going? Are we happy? Not the right one? All right, so I'll keep paddling a little bit more then. But Jakob did say a few things that I think Sara will also address, which is the questions of, for example, scenarios, long-term futures. If we cannot prepare for one future, how might we, or predict the future, how might we prepare for multiple futures? That would be one way to say we're actually preparing for multiple kinds of zombie armies. We also have the question of experimentation. Jakob mentioned as one of the 7 principles. All right, that sounds great and nice, but what does experimentation actually look like? And who needs to experiment and in what way? Okay.
Sure that this one is actually necessary, is it? Or?
This is pretty good. You're fine with that? People are online up here.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Even though I'm trained as a design engineer, I couldn't figure out how to sort of deal with this technical issue. So very proud of that. No, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really happy that I can share some of my work and really some of my passion, one of my passions. And I hope you had some fruitful discussions and enjoyed Jacob's presentation. I just realized I got like a flashback to the time that I was studying as an engineer in fluid mechanics, actually. So yeah, but no, 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 no. It's so many years ago. I think it's 20 years ago. So please don't. No, but I'll try to build on also some of the things that you said, and also expand even more on experiments and why we need experiments in turbulent times, and I'll try to share some of the practice that I've and some of the learnings that I have gained throughout the last 15 years of working in this space. So I'd like to start showing you this picture. This is a still photo of the press conference back in March 2020. So this is our prime minister, and she was actually just re-elected for the third time. But this, maybe you can guess what she's about to do. She's about to lock down the whole country, because this is the time where Corona is really like spreading like a wildfire in Denmark and all over the world. And what we see, there's something interesting happening here 15 minutes into the conference, because this is what she's saying. And I'll just read it out loud. I would like to say to the entire Danish population that we are in uncharted territory in the situation we find ourselves in. We have not experienced this before. Will we make mistakes? Yes, we will. Will I make mistakes as Prime Minister? Yes, I will. We cannot answer all the questions right now. And basically, what she's saying is that the political leadership and the civil servants and the civil service will actually need to experiment their way forward, because they don't know all the answers. And I think that's quite interesting. And I think she did something very bold and very visionary to really sort of to move forward, and actually saying that she doesn't know the answers to all of these questions that arise in this crisis. And she wasn't really the only one. There was, several political leaders around the world coming forward and acknowledging that they don't know the answers to this crisis, and they need to experiment their way forward. I don't think that they actually use the word experiment, because that sounds maybe a little bit dangerous, but at least I think that is exactly what lies beneath. So this was, of course, time of crisis. You also mentioned it, Jacob. And even though it feels kind of distant today, sitting in this room and close together, and traveling from all over the world, I think I can't help wonder whether we could actually use this crisis and this way of handling this crisis to address other crises that we're facing at the moment. So I can't help wonder whether these crises are not equally deep and far-reaching, and if we look closer, urgent. So the question becomes, can we experiment our way through the new approaches with new pathways forward and with new actions? And I think what we need to accept when we sort of try to navigate this uncertainty is that we need to acknowledge and accept that we do not have the full image, and we probably never will. But we need to find new answers, and we need to first and foremost ask new questions, and also start acting on what we know and also what we don't know, and also the unknown unknowns. So this is not a surprise for any of you, but I'd like to state that we cannot navigate uncertainty with prediction alone. This is not a tool that we can only use anymore. So when the path is so unclear as it is right now, in so many ways, I think that we need something more. So basically, you can say that what we used to sort of help us optimize in our society is to analyze. We are used to plan. We are used to sort of predict and scale. We also need something different in order to be able to navigate. So we need to explore. We need to experiment. We need to sense make as well, and we need to learn. And this, of course, requires new skills, but it also requires new ways of organizing our organizations and our collaborations and so on. So combining the two, or even, bridging the two, I think you can say that hypotheses can actually bring us into the unknown and help us ask new questions. And in that sense, I think the hypotheses are really key here. So they capture our assumptions, our hunches, our beliefs, and utilizing experiments can actually turn our assumptions into learning. So coming from a design background, working with design on so many different levels, with product design, with service design, with systems design, throughout the many years, I think that it's quite familiar that you work with experiments. It's sort of the core of design, at least one of the cores, and one of the disciplines. So basically, it's a pilot. It's a way of doing like a proof of concept. It could be like a small implementation. It could even be like a beta version of a new product or a new solution. But what we need to see is that it also is a way to structure our way of learning. It's a way to explore the uncertainty, and it's a way of making the assumptions visible to us. And in that sense, experiments help us learn about the challenge or the problem, not only the solution. I think there's a big difference and a big shift in that. And that's actually quite valuable when you work with uncertainty. We're trying to ask new questions and utilize experiments as a vehicle for learning. So now I also sort of teased a little bit about maybe not only being able to experiment, but also what if the organization itself becomes the experiment. And that's a different challenge. And I think that's quite interesting in when looking at uncertain times, to deep dive into that, because there might be new types of organizations that we need. We might need to create organizations that are capable of ongoing experiments and ongoing learning in a different way, utilizing the learnings, and also, of course, adapt to the learnings. And in that sense, I think organizing is about an ongoing process of sense making rather than a fixed structure. So let's have a look at an example. So I brought a case for you, and this is the Danish Social Innovation Academy. I don't have you met them? No. Yeah, so they live here in the building, and I'm chairing the organization, and Christian is also a member of this network. And it sort of works as a living experiment, as an infrastructure for experimentation and learning and cross-sector collaboration. And it's an example of an organization that does not only run experiments, but continuously evolve through experimentation. So it was founded back in 2019. Just a little bit of background, so you know that. And yes, it's placed here in the building. And it was founded to strengthen Denmark's capacity to work for collective action and for social innovation. And it sort of brings together, it's a network of leaders across sectors, across businesses, across public organizations, across civil society. And it brings together these different organizations, or actually leaders from the organizations, to really address and to work with the fact that, or the premise that we cannot solve the huge societal challenges that we are facing from one single organization. So over time, I think it has evolved a lot from being more like a network for experimentation into an organization that continuously experiment. And today it has national reach all over the small country of Denmark. And it has like a small team that supports the different initiatives. And rather than experimenting with solutions, we have been experimenting with the conditions that make the collective action possible. So that's the big shift that we've been working on for the past 3, 4, 5 years. And to that, I would like to speak to you about that we see actually 4 organizational lenses that we work with in the academy. And then we have time, we have boundaries, we have learning, and we have attention. And I'll give you some examples of how we actually experiment with these different organizational lenses. So moving into the first one, time, it's a lot about creating alternative temporalities for learning and for action. It's about protecting time for exploration, reflections, and collective learning. So when we sort of put in a new or set a new initiative into the world, we don't necessarily have like an end date, or we don't necessarily have the outcome that we want to reach. And I think that's also the key of working with this. And then an interesting example. So we just agreed that Anders, which is the CEO of this academy, he will, after the summer break, he will go into a deep immersion time. So he will actually, for 2 months, deep dive into the knowledge that we have learned for the past 7 years, and see what are the different things that emerge from that, and also building on that learning into the next sort of period for the academy. So I think that's interesting because it sort of leaves time for different reflection. That's just one of the examples. How are we on time? Okay. So the next one is about boundaries. And I think this is also an interesting perspective looking at traditional organizations, because here we are trying to create a more flexible structure around the organization. So we are actually inviting in external perspectives into the organization and into the network. So every year we invite guests into our different events and draw on their learnings and their perspectives and so on. And then we try to also, and this is a new experiment that we tried this year, allowing people to belong to multiple organizations. So sort of working deeply into the academy and the work and some of the agendas, but also working in other organizations. And in that sense, we actually try to treat boundaries as a way to connect the learning and also connect the people instead of like seeing organizations as like containers even. And moving on to the next lens, it's about learning. And of course, when you talk about experiments, it's a lot about learning, utilizing the learning that you get from the experiments that you put into the world, that give you new insights, that so you're able to ask the new questions, as I said early on. And this is a lot about trying to sort of build from the fact that learning is it is a social and situated practice, rather than it's a transfer of information and data and so on. And in that sense, we actually try to work from the premise that we want to learn through participation. We want to learn from people rather than from reports. And in that sense, we put out a new example. We just launched it a few days ago, actually, where you're able to take like a learning residency with one of the other leaders in the network, and being part of their context, their work, and sort of fertilizing with your knowledge, but also gaining something back to your work. So that's another example of learning. The fourth lens is attention, or you could also say maybe even direction. And here we're trying to really look at who actually gets to decide what matters, who actually gets to shape the collective action. And here we're really trying to listen to and pay attention to weak signals. And we are trying to, one of the premises or principles of the work is that it is the members that shape the work in the academy. So we work with different agendas. For example, we work with healthcare, we work with biodiversity, we work with many different agendas. But it all grew from a curiosity or a concern with one of the members. So in that sense, you can say that the ability to set the direction of what the organization should actually be paying attention to is fostered within the membership and within the members' ability to create followership, for example. And in that sense, the agendas will evolve from the members' concerns. And just to say, the example here is actually interesting because we knew there was something about the fact that we need more people to be able to contribute to our welfare system in Denmark. So just like in many other countries, we're facing huge pressure from the demographics, and we need more people to work within the field of elder care and healthcare. And in that sense, we wanted to investigate whether we could mobilize for a new capacity for welfare. And at some point, we were sort of leaning towards creating new solutions for this, but actually we paused the initiative, and we wanted to sort of pay attention to maybe we need to ask more questions, because there's a lot of organizations doing that already. So what is it that a collective action could actually provide or contribute to within this field? So I'm almost coming to the end. Yes. But looking across our work, we began to notice that the academy was not simply experimenting with new initiatives, but also experimenting with some of the fundamental conditions through which organizations organize collective action. And I think you could actually put it up. I like to put it up like, maybe that's my engineering brain that likes the structure here. But anyway, hopefully you can follow. What we're trying to experiment with, or the lens that we're looking through, is the time. How long do we stay with a question? And it really challenges the assumptions that we know of today, that progress depends on speed and predefined outcomes. Then we have boundaries. Who and what gets to move across the organizational boundaries? And this, of course, challenges the assumptions that organizational effectiveness depends on clear and stable boundaries. And then within learning, the lens of learning, how does knowledge travel? Learning happens through knowledge transfer alone. We can actually see no, and it actually sticks even better if we participate, if we sort of emerge into the learnings. And then finally, we have the fourth lens, which is attention or direction. Who decides what matters? And this, of course, challenges the assumption that organizational priorities should be defined from a central point of view and in advance. So that was sort of the summing up. And now I don't have any more slides to kill you with this afternoon. But hopefully, no, just kidding. Hopefully this will sort of give you food for thought and some appetite for the panel as well. And if you're curious, I published a book last year, which sort of brings some of these perspectives, but also other perspectives around how we can navigate societal change.